It was just last weekend that I was in the car with my two children. I'm married to Heather, who is our Farnborough site pastor, and I've got two children. One's 4 and one is 14 months. And we were in the car, and I was taking them to their grandparents' house. And as we're in the car, my 4-year-old says to me, "Daddy, what are those wiggly lines in the sky?" And I was driving along, and I looked out the windscreen. I couldn't see anything. And I was like, what's he talking about? And I was like, oh, maybe he means, the water vapour that comes out the back of planes. And I was like, oh, do you mean the lines that come out the back of planes? And he was like, no, the black lines, Daddy. What are those wiggly black lines? And I thought, what's he talking about? And I looked out again. Couldn't see anything. I was like, maybe he means like shadows of branches or something. So I said, oh, do you mean just the shadows from the trees as we're driving along? He's like, no, Daddy, the big long wiggly lines. He's getting really annoyed. So anyway, I look out again and I look to the side and I realised what he was talking about was there are these huge electricity pylons and then obviously the electric cables that are connecting them between each other on the way to the town that we were heading to. And I was like, oh yeah, so they are electricity pylons and those cables are carrying the electricity to our house. And he goes, oh, so what does electricity do, Daddy? So I was like, well, it powers all the things in our house, and powers a lot of the things in our lives. And I'm about to start a list and he goes, oh, like your phone, Daddy. And I was like, yes, thank you for exposing probably our main usage of electricity in our house. Yes, it does power my phone, yeah. But actually it powers lots of other things as well. The kettle, the microwave, your clock in your bedroom, electricity does all this stuff. And then he goes, so how does electricity move along it? And I was like, this is getting a little bit more complex now. So I was like, well, it's like trying to explain conduction to him a little bit of like, it's going along these cables and it kind of using metal in these cables. It's wiggly metal. It's not like really strong metal. It's like different and it kind of travels along and I'm bumbling my way through this answer. And he then turns to me and says, Daddy, what does electricity look like? And I was like, at that point, I realised I am way beyond my own level of understanding of electricity and energy usage and things like that. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know. I'll have to find out for you. So, and I realised in that moment that I am definitely no expert when it comes to electricity. I'm no electrician and I'm no scientist. And actually, it's really strange because that moment just happened last weekend. Has stuck with me since then for a few reasons. And actually, as we are looking at creation care as a church and going on this journey of looking at what it is to look after the world, there's a couple of reasons why this sort of moment sort of has stuck in my head. And I want to share those two things really with you. Is firstly, in the same way that I'm not an expert in electricity, I'm not an electrician, I am no expert in creation care. I'm no expert in energy usage. I'm no expert in living sustainably. I'm no expert in living ethically. I'm on a journey on it. I'm feeling challenged by it. Over the last kind of months that as a team we've been working on this series, I've certainly felt like I'm on this journey of learning more, of understanding a bit more. But I've also got questions with all of it. Questions like, where do we begin, right? Where do we even start to try and make a difference here? It seems like such a huge task. It can almost feel overwhelming. Where do I begin? Another question I've got is with the size of it and the amount of things you could do, what's like one most important thing I should do? I don't know if any of you have had that question. But for me also, I've got this question as a follower of Jesus and as a Christian in all this of like, as a Christian, and what has this really got to do with the gospel? I've been a Christian for a long time and I'm like, what has this got to do with Jesus? Why are we talking about this in church? Because ultimately I can find out about this stuff by going on the BBC app. I can go on anywhere really online and find out the facts and the figures. Anyway, so what has this really got to do? Why are we bringing it into church? Why are we talking about this? What has this really got to do with the gospel? And so I guess within all this also I've had a few sort of internal battles of like, I want to do the right thing, but rarely it becomes an action. I don't know if you've encountered that. So it becomes a lot of, I should do that or I should do this. Often I find myself prioritising comfort and easy things over things that are sustainable and ethical. So for example, I get far too annoyed at the paper straws in McDonald's milkshakes. I'm having a McDonald's milkshake and it falls apart by halfway down the milkshake. I'm like, I can't believe these straws are ridiculous. And I find myself thinking, why am I getting so annoyed about this? It's because I'm prioritizing my own comfort and my own kind of ease of living ahead of, what they're trying to do by having, not recyclable straws. But I'm growing, I'm learning. I've felt convicted in recent times, and I'm really sort of feeling challenged to do more bits. I'm finding myself with a bit more clarity around the theology of this side of things and how it does impact my faith. I'm really inspired by those ahead of me in the journey, and I'm wanting to do more for sure. So one of the things that moment in the car with my son I've been reflecting on is that I'm no expert in this for sure, but I'm on a journey on it. The other area of reflection I've had on that moment is that the length of time it took me to find those electric cables and the pylons. I realised that obviously I know that there's these electricity pylons and there's these cables, but I hadn't noticed them. I hadn't seen them anywhere. And in this journey of creation care, I would love, and in this message today, I would love to help us all to notice some things. I'd love us to begin to notice things in our faith that maybe we weren't aware of before. I'd love us to begin to notice things that maybe we did know, but maybe we've forgotten or we've neglected to consider maybe in recent times. I'd love us to notice maybe things in our faith, things in our lifestyles, things in our habits that we don't necessarily understand fully, such as me with electricity, but we're willing to pay a bit of attention to them. I would love us to begin to notice patterns in our lives that maybe need to change. Small things, small habitual things that we do that might, if we were to begin to notice them, to see what we might be able to change. So that's the plan for today. We're looking at the creation narrative in this creation care series, and we're going to be taking each week a moment of the creation story that we read in Genesis, and we're going to be talking about that and seeing what we might learn from it. And today we're looking at Genesis 1. We're looking at the first thing, God's first move, the first thing that he creates. I would encourage you on your own time, read the whole of the creation story in the book of Genesis, which is the first book in the Bible. And literally you read them in chapter 1 and chapter 2. There's actually 2 accounts and you can read them. But today we're just going to focus on that beginning bit of what God does. And it starts from Genesis 1, from verse 1. It says this: "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light.' And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and he called the darkness night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day." Now, before we jump into this, I want to remind us of a few things that we heard last week. Last week in church, if you were at any of our physical gatherings or here online, you will have seen and heard the message from Ruth Valerio, who works for Tear Fund, an environmentalist, social activist. She is an expert in all of this stuff. And she said a few things about what we learn about God in this creation narrative that I want to remind us of. Firstly, she said there is one God. There isn't multiple gods. There's not kind of a collaboration with creation here with multiple gods going on. There is one God. Also, she told us and reminded us and taught us that actually the creation of the world didn't come out of some kind of cosmic battle. There was no war going on. Actually, the world was created out of peace and actually out of just simply God's breath and his words. And so it's important for us to remember that. Also, the thing she told us was that God declared creation good. At the end of everything he's creating, he's saying, and it was good. And God said that it was good. And then actually at the end, when he's created everything, he then says, it is very good. And it's important we remember these things about what creation is, that creation is good and who God is as well, as we continue in this journey. Now, the first thing he says, as we read there, he said, "Let there be light." Interestingly enough, it's worth noting that actually it's not until day 4 of creation that God creates the sun, S-U-N, sun. So this light is different. We're not talking about light that comes from the sun. We're talking about light that is a more bigger picture, something deeper than this, far more important than simply the light that comes from the sun, S-U-N, sun, because that's not till day 4. Okay, so this is different. Now, what I want us to do in just a space of a few minutes is begin to explore what the Bible says about light. Now, as an aside here, if you're ever wanting to explore what the Bible's saying about a certain thing, the temptation can be we find a word such as light, We then go to the Oxford Dictionary and we say, well, what does the Oxford Dictionary define light as? And we go, well, that's what the Bible means. Actually, if you want to know the biblical definition and what does the Bible mean when it's referring to something, the best way to do it is to use the Bible to explain the Bible. So what you do is you take this word, such as light, and you then go through the Bible and you find where light is mentioned, and then you begin to paint a picture as to what the Bible is talking about when it talks about light. Now, I've got 25 minutes with you today, so I haven't got the time to go through every verse in the Bible and all this kind of stuff. But what we're going to do, I want to just bring to you a few things and really paint the broad picture. Because when you really look at that, if you were to do something like that, the general thing you'll find that the term light is, when it's used in the Bible, is that light represents God, and light represents God's presence. You see it time and time again through Scripture. So let me just paint a few things for you. So in the Old Testament, which is the first bit of the Bible, in a book called Psalm, which is full of poetry and prose like that, we read this. It says, Psalm 27, "The Lord is my light and my salvation." Light represents God and God's presence. In the Old Testament, a group of people called the Israelites, at one point in their history, they were slaves under the Egyptians. And you may know the story, but God sends 10 plagues to Egypt, one of which being darkness covering the whole land. Now, interestingly enough, you read in the book of Exodus that in this time, the Israelites, actually, in this time of darkness, the Israelites had light in the places where they lived. And there's this representation that God is with the Israelites in this. And actually, the light represents God's presence with them. And light is used in metaphor and imagery throughout the Old Testament as well. So again, in Psalm, in 119, it says this, "Your word is a lamp for my feet, a light on my path." And we see here that God's presence and God himself is the kind of the guiding steps for us. He is our wisdom. He is our we can look to him for guidance in our lives. So we see this picture being painted as to what light represents. But it carries on in the New Testament as well. In the book of 1 John, New Testament is the second half of the Bible, and 1 John is a letter, and it says simply in 1 John 1:5, God is light. This is continuing into the New Testament as well. Also, it says in James, the Father of heavenly lights who does not change like shifting shadows. It even says about God that God lives in an unapproachable light. The awe, the magnificence of God is being painted here with light representing him and his presence. But what's fascinating is because of Jesus, and we'll come on to this shortly, because of Jesus, we can approach God despite this unapproachable light. We can approach him because of all that he is and all that he has done and his work in us that we'll come to. Now, looking at Jesus now. When we see Jesus walking on the earth, we see these famous phrases from Jesus where he declares of himself in John 8, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." So Jesus here himself is saying, I am the light of the world. He's saying here, I am God. I represent God. I am him. We know of Jesus that he was fully man and fully God. And here he is saying, I am the light of the world. It's this continuation of what light, the biblical definition of light throughout Scripture. See, he is saying that he is God. And he is saying that actually he's also carrying and representing God's presence as well. Now, I want to show you something really cool about Jesus that isn't always known. In Colossians, the book of Colossians, it's actually a letter. We read about Jesus. And it says this in the first chapter of Colossians. The Son, this is talking about Jesus, S-O-N. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Then listen to this. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So here we have Jesus saying of himself, I am the light of the world. I am God. I am carrying God's presence. We then read in Colossians that actually he is there at creation. For in him all things were created. So there is something going on here with Jesus at creation as well. It's not just Jesus pops into the world at 0 AD and that's it. No, he is there at creation. So I want us now to go back to the creation story. See, we see right at the beginning of creation that the first thing that God creates is light. It's not land, it's not sea, it's not animals, it's not people, it's not humanity, it's simply light. And actually you see this through creation, actually, that the first half of creation really is kind of God creating the spaces. He's creating almost like what you could call like the realms of what will then inhabit the earth. It's not until the second half that we see animals being created and the birds that fly and things like that. But now it's almost like he's creating the spaces that will be filled. The first space is simply light. So right at the beginning of creation, we have God, the Father. We have the Holy Spirit hovering over the waters. We have Jesus there in creation because all things are being created in him, through him and for him. And he wants us to know that about him. And it's almost like it's being reiterated at the beginning that the first thing he creates isn't land, isn't sea, but is light. The presence of God is there at the beginning of creation, and he wants us to know that. He wants us to know that he is the source of everything. He wants us to know of his presence being the most important thing ever. It's more important than me and you. Sometimes we think about creation being about us, and it's not. Creation is about him. Creation is about his glory. It's about all of creation. It's about giving him glory. Humanity and all of the elements of creation is all about giving him glory. Things in heaven, things on earth, seen and unseen, all of it is for his glory and to celebrate him. So it's fascinating. It begins to shift our mentality a little bit. Now, what I want us to do now is begin to shift our look now at the use of light. Now, if you think about it, light is the foundation of life, really, when it comes to our everyday, right? If you think about it, it's the essential building block that emanated from the Word and the Spirit of God. Light is the foundation block for our daily life. We are totally dependent on light, aren't we? Think about it. It's light that enables the majority of us to be able to see and to be able to perceive the world. For those of us who can see, we have the ability to look around and see the world around us and to be able to navigate our way around our days. It's of all of our senses, it's the first one that we use. It's the primary one that we use. Light gives us vitamin D to keep us healthy. It grows our food. It maintains our body clocks. Light is so essential to our day to day. And if we think about it that through the technology that has been developed and the invention and the incredible creativity of humans and God working through us, we have electricity, right? And electricity is enabling us to live a life through the light, and we can create light for us so that we can do more, so that we can be and live in this world to an even higher quality level. Now, it got me thinking about things like the Industrial Revolution that happened many, many years ago, and a lot of the kind of inventions that happened around then that has enabled so much technology and so much advancement in our world. Now, when we're thinking about climate change and we're thinking about fossil fuels and we're thinking about creation care and all this kind of stuff, it can be quite easy to say, well, the Industrial Revolution was a terrible thing because we've now started using all this stuff. As I was pondering that, I felt saying, actually, no, I don't think it was a bad thing. Think of all that we've been able to do in terms of medicine, the way we can care for one another, the way we can live our lives, the fact that we can do church in this kind of way. Huge amounts of what we can do now is because of the Industrial Revolution. So there are incredible positives that we can have from the Industrial Revolution. And that, yes, there are some negatives that we are now experiencing, but there was certainly some positives there as well. And so electricity, we can look at electricity and say, no, that's a terrible thing. We shouldn't use it because we're damaging the world through using electricity. I think that's a bit of a naive way to look at things. I think actually, rather than thinking, that electricity is bad, let's begin to explore how and where our electricity is sourced from. How are we creating this electricity? Are we creating it in a way that is sustainable? Are we sourcing our energy from a place that is ethical and is serving the world around us well? See, what we're able to do with electricity is incredible. The access to light and electricity is hugely important, and in recent decades we've seen real leaps forwards in the way that electricity is being sourced. What's fascinating is that the provision of electricity is now across 89% of the world, which is incredible. But that still means that there are 840 million people in the world that have no access to electricity. 840 million people in the world. Now, I'm not going to throw lots of stats at you today, but I did want to sort of share this one because I think it's fascinating. In fact, we are advancing, as I said, and by 2030, apparently that is estimated that there'll be 650 million people. So the number is reducing. But it made me think, I've been thinking about the way we source electricity from an ethical, sustainable perspective in terms of being green around the world. But actually, getting electricity to people is also incredibly important when we're looking at creation care. It's not just purely about trying to do it ethically and all that kind of thing of doing it in a green way, but this is a justice issue. That there are people who are living a life without electricity at the minute, without any access to electricity, and think about how limited their life must be without it. Think of all that they are trying to do. You think of school children when they come home from school and it is dark already and they are trying to do homework at school, their education is hampered. You think of the simplicity of things such as access to clean water through electricity that we have. There's huge amounts that are implicated by not having electricity. So this isn't simply a case of being green, this is a justice issue. Let's bring and do all that we can to get electricity so that people have access to good light, so that they have access to that energy, so that they might live a great life that is thriving, that is able to serve one another. And let's see what we can do to spread that across the world and not just to be about what we're doing here in our own worlds. So access to this light and electricity is important, and the source of it is important too. So at the moment, 65.1% of electricity comes from fossil fuels. And ultimately, non-sustainable ways of using electricity are limited. We need to think, how can we change this? We need to think, how can we make it so it is sustainable? See, the impacts of fossil fuel usage, as I'm learning, as I said, I'm no expert in this, is far more than what I have time to talk about right now, right? I'm not an expert in it, and there is so much to learn about this. There are so many places you can go to learn more, to discover more about this, to see those facts and figures. In fact, if you're not already, get in a small group, and there are these incredible small group notes that are available on our website, and within there are all sorts of resources to help you learn more about the energy crisis that we're in. You only need to turn on the news to see the hike in gas prices, and part of that is due to availability of gas. But there's so much to learn about all of this. And so I'm not going to spend much time looking at the details of all that. I encourage you to spend that time on your own researching more about it so you might understand it more. And it's what I need to do as well, is understanding about this more. But one question I want to go back to that I mentioned at the beginning is, why should we do anything? See, Jesus said this to us. Not only did he say of himself that he is the light of the world, he said this to us: you are the light of the world. This is in Matthew 5. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So here, Jesus is saying not only is he the light, but he calls us to be lights too. We are called to give light to who? Everyone in the house. The world deserves to have access to electricity. He is calling us to give light to everyone in the house. We are called to be on that hill, spreading our light as far as we can go. So who needs our light? Who needs our action? Who needs the hope that we carry? Jesus is calling us to be God's representatives here. In the same way that we said earlier, light represents God and it represents God's presence. So if he is saying to us, you are the light of the world, you are God's representative, called to bring his presence to it. In areas of justice, in area of energy usage, we are called to come and bring it. But I want to also, in this, go back to the Colossians passage, one we read earlier, because it carries on. We talk about being light of the world often in relation to us telling people about Jesus, which is so important. It's so important we share that hope through our words to go, hey, you need to know Jesus. He died for your sin. He died on the cross that you might know him. But there's a little bit more to it as well. See, going back to this Colossian passage, when speaking about Jesus, it says this. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, talking about Jesus, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on heaven or things in earth, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. All things, it says in there. Jesus died on the cross to reconcile to God all things. Now, some of this we'll know straight away. He died so that people might be brought back to him, so that we might, as individuals, be brought into relationship with him. And that's right. He died so that people might be brought back together. Because one of the damages of what we call the fall, when sin, like living independently of God, came into the world, is that people started battling each other and relationships were fractured. And Jesus died so that people might be brought back to each other, reconciled with each other, so that might be reconciled with God. People also, through the death and resurrection of Christ, can be made one within themselves as well, that they are bringing reconciliation within themselves, that there is a healthy view of ourselves and an understanding of who we are as individuals. And he said, all things, reconciled to himself, all things. Not just humans, not just humanity, but all things, the whole of creation. Jesus died for all of creation so that all of creation might be reconciled to him. That what this means is that actually that all things would return back to the way they were intended to be, the way they were created to be. This world in this beautiful way that he created it. As he said to it, it is good. And for us, as people who are being lights of the world, we are called to bring this kingdom to earth. We are called to bring this to people, bring this to the world around us. We're called to share Jesus with people. We're called to live in peace and harmony with one another. We're called to have a healthy understanding of who we are and but what we call shalom with ourselves, this incredible wholeness in ourselves. And we are called to do all that we can to help this world be what it was originally intended to be. See, when we ask this question, what has creation care got to do with the gospel? Simply put it is the gospel. It's part of the gospel. This isn't an add-on. This isn't a bonus. This isn't isn't it nice to look after the world? This is what Jesus died for, so that he might reconcile all things, so that all things might be brought back to their original order, us as humans, but the world itself as well. And now we are lights of the world. We get to play a part. You as an individual aren't going to solve it all, but you have got a part to play. I've got a part to play. In my feeble understanding in all of this, I've got a part to play. We all do. This is the gospel. This is what the gospel is about. And we get to be part of it. So what do we do? Right? It takes me back to one of those other questions now of like, okay, for me, I'm beginning to understand this. I'm beginning to learn that actually this is part of the gospel. This is part of what Jesus died for. But what do I do now? And the reality is there's a lot we can do. And as I said, I'm not the expert in this. So I'm going to do something a little bit different today. And I'm not going to give you a list of things to do, other than one thing, which is actually find out for yourself what you need to do. In a way, it almost feels like I'm passing the buck. But what I want you to do is I want you to wrestle with this yourself. And what I want you to do is to find the places where you can find what to do. And there is a great place where I can send you to. So there is something I want you to do, which is actually go to the Creation Care website. And on there, we've put together a whole load of small group notes that you can help process this stuff. And in your small groups, you'll be working it through together. And as part of this, we have created every week kind of almost like a 3 steps or 3 kind of pronged approach for things that you might be able to do to begin to play your part in the creation care story. Firstly, there's short-term steps, and you'll see these little icons. Short-term steps, things that you might be able to do tomorrow. Have a think, have a read of those, have an explore of what you might be able to do. Talk about it in your small groups. What could you do tomorrow for this? Then the second one is medium-term steps. Now, this is something that maybe you could begin to look at in the coming months, 3 to 6 months. Go, hey, what's something that's a little bit kind of a slightly bigger step that might need a little bit of planning, but I can still do it in a few months' time. And then we've also put in there long-term steps. Now, these things may be more sort of maybe needing a little bit more finances that you need to save for, and that kind of really consider quite carefully. Things that you will need to pray for and really plan into. But have a read of those. I wonder how God might want you to take part in this, being the light of the world, to see justice so that people across the world have access to the energy they need, as well as looking at your own energy usage to go, okay, right, when it comes to just my energy usage, how can I live in a sustainable way, an ethical way, a way that is loving and serving and trying to bring this world back to its original order? I'd love you to notice. I'd love you to notice where you're at with all of this, and prayerfully consider what you might be able to do next.